Hi there, my name is Chris Acton with Acton Creative, and this is a handwoven experience. And in today's episode, I am bringing you Overshot Variations using scale. Now, you may be thinking, okay, Chris, this sounds really familiar. Yes, friends, this is the third in a trio of episodes all about creating your own variations. And I just happened to pick Overshot as the pattern I wanted to use to demonstrate how you can do that. So in the first episode, I talked about treadling, and I showed you how you can break down a pattern into its core components and then put it back together in a new and interesting way that you like, right? Something just listening to that little creative voice, making your own thing. In the next video, then, I talked about how color can be the best tool when you want to make your own variations in a pattern. Again, I'm using Overshot, could be anything. But I want to demonstrate how you can make big changes and little changes to color that can really impact your fabric in interesting ways. So today, we're going to talk about how to use scale in making your own variations. That is kind of the overriding theme of the whole set of videos, is that I want you to think a little bit outside the box and imagine if you were to mix it up a bit, how you would do it. These are all kinds of tools that you can use for this. So let's talk about scale. In weaving, boy, the whole craft is really about relationships, right? You've got the warp and the weft. You have one set of yarns and another set of yarns. Could be the same size, could be different sizes, could be different textures, could be different spacings, could be, there's all kinds of options, right? So it's so much about how the warp and the weft are constantly interacting with each other. And those together are creating your final product, your final fabric. But scale is such an interesting part of that, because let's say that your yarn in the warp is one size, but the yarn in the weft is drastically different. Let's say that the pattern, you have a small repeat of the pattern or you have a big repeat of the pattern. There's all these really interesting ways that you can scale your fabric so it looks just really, really different from each other. So here is where the adventure starts for me. I was working on my fabric that's inspired by a German pattern by Marguerite Porter Davison in her green book. And I started here with this as my pattern weft. Let me back up for just a moment. For Overshot, you always have two wefts. One is the background weft that is holding everything together. It's the same size as your warp yarns. It is supposed to just blend right in. It's the responsible one, making sure the fabric will not fall apart. But then you also have a second weft that's called the pattern weft. At least that's what I typically call it. And it is meant to be a bigger size weft because it has to show up. This is the one that actually showcases the pattern of the fabric, right? So for me, this is the pattern weft that I was starting with. And there are six little yarns all kind of twisted together, right? But I thought, okay, I want to play with scale here. So what if I systematically took each of these yarns out and made it finer? How is that going to change my fabric? Because everything else stays the same. I'm going to use the same type of yarn. I'm using the same treadling, all the stuff. Now, I have a couple caveats that you should know here. Caveat number one, when you are doing Overshot, historically, they recommend that the pattern weft be 2 to 3 times the size of your warp yarns. I like to inflate that. I like to really put a lot of yarns, so it's a very bold pattern. That just makes me happy. So this is absolutely more than 2 to 3 times the size of my warp yarns here, but that's how I like to roll. So you should know that going into it, and you should also know that science was never really my favorite subject. So there are some scientific flaws with my experiment here. First of all, as you'll notice, my set of 6 yarns are not all one color. They're both black and gray. So as I take out one yarn at a time, it's going to tweak the color just a little bit. So just put an asterisk by those two things as you hear the rest of my story. So I started with this as the pattern weft, and then each time I decided I was going to switch it, I would take one yarn out of the mix and see what that did to the pattern. So I started here, I go here next, a little smaller, a little, and I'll be honest, I took out the grays first. So then it gets even smaller and smaller and smaller. Can you see those guys? This is with 4, this is with 3, this is with 2. See those guys? And this is where I landed. 2 fine little black yarns. Now, let me show you some images so you can get a gauge of what this does to the fabric. So look at this progression from the big chunky series of 6 yarns together all the way down to having just two little black ones. Now you'll notice that it does things for the fabric that are really interesting. First of all, my whole kind of a shape of the pattern repeat changes because it gets squattier. So scientific. It gets squattier, friends, because there's less happening for each part, each pick, right? So the entire repeat kind of squishes down into itself. But it also changes the relationship between the warp and the weft because there's just, you just see more of the warp, right? You see more of the warp, and the each pick of the weft is smaller. So the whole scale changes the look as you play with, in this case, how many yarns I'm using for the pattern weft. But friends, this can be applied to any project, right? You don't have to be using a project where you have multiples all here together. Just go to your shelves. Do you have multiple yellows that are in different sizes? Do you have a 5-2 or an 8-2 or a 22 in cotton? Okay, play with that. How fun would that be just to see the difference between the different size yarns and the scale and the different kind of things you can do there. There's all kinds of potential. And like I said, my hope is that with this little trio of fun episodes, watching me play with my Overshot project, is that you will start to think outside the box. What if I took the basics of the project that I have in front of me and started to tweak it? What if I started to play with treadling and color and scale to make my own thing? Ooh, it's so good to stretch that creative muscle. And I encourage you to do it, friends. So tell me, have you done a little tinkering with scale? Let me know if you have played with that a little bit and what has been your findings. Mr. and Mrs. Scientist, what have been your findings, my weaving friends? So let me know in the comments if you've had a chance to play with some scale. All right, my friends, have a wonderful week. Happy weaving.